All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, my radar yesterday focused on a very dire scenario for the GOP, which I think is increasingly likely in light of the impeachment showdown in Congress. The GOP is the closest it's come to actually splintering in about 100 years. Now, on one hand, you have neocons and Senate institutionalists who are rightfully appalled by Trump's behavior and themselves stand for a dead policy consensus. On the other hand, you have a group of people who want to excuse the riots and might be amenable to a populist critique of the system. Neither side is capable of actually winning a presidential election, let alone a statewide election in a normally conservative state like, I don't know, Georgia. One can easily foresee how this party could splinter now. But that's just because of internal division. Today, I actually want to focus on the other factors here that I believe will lead the GOP to even worse doldrums in the coming years. That's Joe Biden. Now, caveat at the top, I don't like Joe Biden. I did my best to expose his actual record here. But ultimately, he won. And as I said before, I want him to be successful. Increasingly, I believe he is going to be so. And I'm not talking about marginally successful. I think wildly, at least in the first year or two of his presidency. Right now, there are U.S. troops sleeping in the Capitol building for the first time since the Civil War. Political rhetoric is probably at the hottest that it's been since 1968 in America. We have a massive economic depression because of Washington's failure, and we've had a president preside over a pandemic with a policy of basically just wishing that it would all go away. Biden, by simply existing, is going to do a better job than Trump. The MAGA people do not want to hear this, but they lost the presidential election precisely for this reason. Literally, all Joe Biden has to do is come in, use his newfound Democratic majority in the U.S. Senate to pass $2,000 stimulus checks and more effectively than Trump distribute a vaccine. With the Republican majority albatross off their necks, they can get modest state and local aid through Congress. And by June or July, after the vaccine has been more widely distributed, he is going to preside over a booming, and I mean booming, economy. A populace that just wants to end all this chaos to end, and they want to go watch a movie or go to a concert or get on a plane to a tropical destination, and they have sky-high savings rates and possibly now a $2,000 check in the bank. Biden is going to be one of the most popular presidents in my lifetime. And if he screws it up, he truly is a joke of a human being. Which begs the question, what the hell does the GOP do in that scenario? Since 2010, the Republican Party has stood for nothing except for being anti-left. As I said yesterday, this is very potent when you have the overreach of cultural liberalism and globalism that we had embodied in Ivy League professor Barack Obama or the uniquely odious Hillary Clinton. But Joe Biden is not that man. He might have hired a lot of them, but only politically obsessed people like me even know who he's hired. To most people, they look at the top of the ticket and the tone. Biden presents fine enough as working class Joe, even if you and I know that that isn't what he actually stands for. And given the absolute chaos and insanity of the last year, they are going to forgive the marginal corporate looting and globalism abroad as long as he does not start like a full-scale war in Iraq. So what will the Republican Party do? Mitch McConnell will still be their leader in the Senate. He will try what he does best, which is obstruction. But critically missing this time is a guy named Barack Hussein Obama as the opponent. The culture wars that allowed the GOP base to support McConnell's obstruction under Obama are not the same. Namely because apparently McConnell is now on the other side of that base, especially whenever it comes to impeaching Trump. You'll see a small caucus which still believes the Tea Party nonsense around deficits and taxes, but it won't be everybody. And critically, it will not be enough to win an election. So now we know a couple of things. All things considered, Biden is about to be pretty popular, and the Republican Party's past playbook against Obama is extremely unlikely to work. Sure, it might be enough to win elections in red states and primaries, but in terms of the Electoral College or the popular vote, doesn't have a chance. So what do you do about this dire situation? Well, I have an idea. What if you actually stood for something? Some incredible polling came across my radar yesterday that I think encapsulates all the Republicans' problems. A new Data for Progress poll found that a sizable chunk of Republican voters think that their party stands on the opposite sides of questions around pre-existing conditions for Obamacare, on whether the party supports a $15 minimum wage, and on the environment. In fact, as Matt Iglesias has put it, quote, people who align with Republicans on broad values themes, opposition to abortion, love of guns, patriotism, or panic at the thought of a diversifying country, they find it simply not credible that their champions are actually running on such a politically toxic agenda that would clearly lose elections. That's incredible, and it's 100% true. Most of the Republican Party's own voters cannot believe they actually believe such terrible things, and thus they don't punish them for it. Now, as I said here before, I believe the culture war is the preeminent driver of American politics. I also think the one thing that can supersede that is good policy. That's exactly what things like $2,000 checks are. That's getting a vaccine into your arm faster. Those are the types of policies which transcend the culture war and critically would starve the Republican Party of the ability to use those culture war issues to harvest votes while implementing, or in this case, holding up an agenda that could deliver for people's lives. The only way out is the one that I've said here for a long time. You can stand as a bulwark to cultural liberalism. That's great, but it's not enough. And it must, absolutely must, actually be paired with an agenda that wants to improve people's lives, or there's no realistic shot at ever winning the presidency again in modern times. Perhaps Joe Biden is going to screw all this up. Given the disastrous state of the country that Trump has left us with, I cannot imagine that it would be that hard to do a good job at this point. One thing is for certain. On the current trajectory, whether Trump is impeached or not, the GOP is headed for doom. The question is whether they want to do anything about it at all. And obviously, I think I know the answer to that question, which is no, they don't want to do anything. But let's say they did, right? Yeah. I mean, is it going to be fun living in total irrelevance for the next 8 years? I don't think so. I mean, a lot of people around here are going to make a lot of money, but eventually some upstart politician somewhere is going to want to actually do something. And I think the scenario I laid out is very likely. I think Biden is going to be very popular. I mean, 75% approval ratings. Like I was telling you today, got the great news my parents are going to get the vaccine. I'm like, hey, you know what? Greg Abbott, not a fan of a lot of his politics. I will support that guy until his dying day because he implemented a policy and rolled out the vaccines in such a fashion that he literally changed my life and my parents' life. I don't even care what he thinks about a lot of stuff. I think that's the case for a lot of people. That type of good policy, good governance can supersede all of that, but it's something you actually have to do. And I don't think Biden is going to be the culture warrior that Obama was just by being embodied in who he was and like the way he talked and like what he stood for. And then Hillary in the same way and just sort of like sheer, just like ghastly odiousness. He doesn't have that. And so when you don't have that just level of cultural backlash, which you saw in the election, then what are you going to do? Because what they did is they weaponized that in order for opposition. And I also love that polling, I'm sure you did too, where 1/3 of Republican voters were like, oh yeah, they support a $15 minimum wage. Yeah. I'm like, what are you talking about?
That's amazing.
Because they literally can't fathom that their leaders would be against it.
Yeah, I mean, they really have a very challenging situation on their hands. And I think you're right to point out a couple factors. Number one, that Joe Biden is just really hard to demonize. I mean, this was one of the things that his opponents in the Democratic primary found out. It's like there was such resistance to saying anything negative about Joe.
I love him.
That, he just has this like affable, relatable vibe, and people can't picture him as like, he doesn't read as corporate sellout villain, even though that has been what he's represented for a lot of his career. On the other hand, he's also not particularly ideological. So his greatest skill, and you have to say the man is incredibly skilled to have survived in D.C. for all of these many years, and to have ascended to the presidency of the United States. You have to give him credit for having some political skill. And his skill has been sort of reading the winds, where things are headed, how's the country feeling, what's this sort of elite mood as well. And so that's why I think you have actually seen him move left on economic policies even since he's been elected.
Yes.
Because there is this sense in the broader public and even within, I think, the elite strata of society that, like, we got to do a little bit something for these people or it's going to be really ugly. And this, what happened last week sort of underscores the fact that they were fine to get their tax cuts and suck up all the power, all the money, all the oxygen, all the everything, as long as there were no potential blowback and consequences to themselves, their family, within their gated communities. And now they're starting to look around and say, my God, that may not be the case. Like, if we don't give a little bit of something here, we could have a much more dramatic and frightening transformation on our hands. I covered here on the show, Morning Joe Scarborough out there being like, social democratic values are amazing. We got to do this to save American capitalism. Everybody's on board with that, right?
Yeah, look, I mean, some people here know I talked to Joe, and he thinks he's a populist, and that's great. But look, I think that the way that Joe Biden has handled this is a masterclass. Totally silent during the impeachment. He could go full culture warrior, impeachment, like what Hillary is doing, like impeach Trump. All this, this is the stuff that she was. This is all the stuff she did in 2016. He was just stood back. Now he's about to introduce a $1.3 trillion stimulus bill. Now he's even embraced one of my favorite conservative policies, which has been pushed by my anti-establishment right, the child tax credit, to the largest expansion of the child tax credit in history. These are things where, let's say you're a conservative person, like one of those wealthy, suburbanites, not even wealthy, middle class or something like that, and Biden gives you $3,600 per child over the rest of their, until they're 17. That's a lot of money for a lot of people. That's the type of thing where you go, this really changed my life. I mean, this changed the way that I live my life. My ability to send my kid to soccer camp or whatever, buy a new car, which would ease up on our life, take them, here, maybe move to a place that we were considering moving. These are things which really materially impact people. I'm not saying it'll win over everyone, but by doing that and not going full, Trump, as a he gave his speech, but that was it. And I think it's genius.
He's been very measured since he was actually relatively measured in the election.
Yes.
He's been very measured since the election.
With Stop the Steal, he pretended like it didn't exist.
And
which is brilliant.
That was 100% the right move, because the place where the Democratic Party is now, especially vis-a-vis white working class and lower middle class voters, is there's nothing you can say that's going to convince them that Trump is evil or other people that they've trusted are evil. You have to do two things. You have to show them. You have to show them the policies and the actual impact on their lives that make measured improvements. And you have to show them, not demonizing them and their families and their communities. And by the way, this leader that a lot of people have had a lot of trust in, unfortunately, in my view. And so I think Biden is this isn't going to all flip overnight. But I think if you're looking at how do we start to win back a few of these voters a little bit at a time, start to do a little better in rural America, a little bit better with non-college educated voters, these are the type of policies and the type of direction that will be very effective at that. Now, look, I think both of us would agree, let's see it first before we get too far down the road of giving credit, what actually is in it, how bold do they ultimately go. But I saw a very astute commentary on Twitter that was basically look, with this incredibly thin margin, one vote margin in the Senate, they'll have the coalition to pass their really popular economic plans, and they probably won't have the coalition to pass the things that are like the more culturally liberal, less popular things. So it's actually a good place for them to be. And also because they're nowhere close to getting 60 votes, they know everything they have to do is basically through budget reconciliation. So they're not even trying to get 60 votes. It's just going to be economic. They're look, we're going to go big. We're going to do it through budget reconciliation. They're super focused, and Bernie Sanders is an expert on what you can do through that process and been thinking about this for a long time. So yeah, it's a wild situation, but Trump has set the bar so low that if we fast forward a year from now and most people have gotten a vaccine, and then you can go and
and expanded Obamacare protections. Think about that.
Right. And if you can go out and just do live a normal life, people are going to find that to be a profoundly positive change in their lives.
I think people are underestimating it. He is not Barack Obama. He has got much better instincts on a lot of different politics. The GOP strategy back then is just not going to work against Joe Biden, and it's just going to lead to permanent irrelevance, and standing for something actually can really make a difference. But we'll see.
How that works.
I think it's good. They'll play this 5 years from now and be like, oh, okay. All right. I'm looking forward to your Radar Next result.